On a sweltering 4th of July morning, 8-year-old Lily Wentworth vanished into a sea of red, white, and blue-orite in front of her parents. Thousands of people filled the streets. Fireworks roared, confetti rained down, and in the chaos, Lily simply disappeared. For nearly 2 decades, there were no witnesses, no evidence, no leads. Until a real estate agent testing out a drone caught footage of a girl standing motionless on a rooftop just 6 blocks from where Lily vanished, wearing the same vintage strawberry print dress she had worn that day in Lancenlin, Luke. The morning sun rose early in Summerhill, Missouri, spilling golden light across the small town's neatly trimmed lawns and fluttering flags. Already, the scent of sizzling sausage and maple syrup drifted through the windows of the Wentworth home, mingling with the distant sound of a marching band tuning up in the high school parking lot. Lily Wentworth, 8 years old and endlessly curious, sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, tugging the hem of her favorite dress over her knees. It was cotton and soft, from 100 washes, white with tiny strawberries printed all over, the sleeves slightly puffed and trimmed in faded red lace. She'd insisted on wearing it, even though it was a little too small now. Her mother, Caroline, had tried to convince her to pick something newer, but Lily had shaken her head with that quiet stubbornness she inherited from both parents. "It's lucky," she'd said simply. Downstairs, Greg Wentworth flipped pancakes while whistling to the crackling radio in the corner. Caroline stood at the kitchen island, cutting watermelon into precise cubes, occasionally peeking out the window to check the gathering parade-goers lining Maple Street. Her hand paused for a moment as she watched a group of kids sprinting past on the sidewalk, red and blue ribbons flying behind them like kites. Then she smiled. It was going to be a good day. Lily bounded down the stairs 2 at a time, the hem of her dress brushing her knees and her white sneakers already scuffed from racing through the backyard that morning. Greg turned, spatula in hand, and raised an eyebrow. "That dress again?" he teased. "It's practically vintage." Lily beamed and twirled, letting the skirt flare. "It's 4th of July. I want to wear something that's been to the parade before." Greg exchanged a quick glance with Caroline, who shook her head, amused. "She's got her own ideas, this one." They ate breakfast together, the kitchen warm with laughter and the gentle clinking of forks against plates. Outside, the hum of anticipation grew louder, music drifting closer, car engines rumbling, the sharp pops of firecrackers echoing off storefronts. The whole town seemed to vibrate with excitement. Lily grabbed her small red plastic flag from the side table, stuck a cherry-flavored lollipop in her cheek, and headed for the door with barely contained energy. She waved for her cousin Jamie, already waiting on the sidewalk with a balloon and sparkler, and yelled, "Let's go! We'll miss the candy if we're late." Greg and Caroline followed, not knowing they were about to step into the last ordinary morning of their lives. The sun was higher now, casting short shadows on the pavement and warming the backs of legs as the crowd pressed together along the edge of Maple Street. Families lined the sidewalks with lawn chairs, picnic blankets, and coolers, waving flags and fanning themselves with programs printed in red ink. Lily stood on tiptoe beside her cousin Jamie, her eyes wide as she scanned the street for the first signs of the floats. She could already hear the approaching music trumpets and snare drums beating out a rhythm that made her bounce in place. "Do you see it yet?" she asked, her voice nearly lost in the din of the crowd. Jamie nodded and pointed. "There, the fire truck!" Just behind it came the Summerhill High Marching Band, in sharp blue uniforms, followed by a float shaped like a giant eagle, feathers made from hundreds of paper plates painted white. Lily's face lit up. "I want to get closer," she said, already edging forward through the crowd. Greg, standing just behind with Caroline, shifted the cooler under one arm and leaned forward. "Stay where we can see you, Lil," he called out. But she didn't answer, caught up in the excitement. Jamie grabbed her hand, and the two of them ducked between a man with a stroller and a woman tossing Tootsie Rolls into a bag held by her toddler. Lily waved at a woman dressed as Lady Liberty, who blew her a kiss and tossed her a necklace of plastic red beads. Lily caught it mid-air and slipped it over her head, laughing. Greg moved to follow, smiling to himself. He could still see the top of Lily's head, that messy brown ponytail swaying as she ran toward the street. He stepped forward, trying not to lose sight of her. Caroline tapped his arm and handed him Lily's forgotten juice box, then turned to wave at someone from her church choir. A sudden, sharp burst echoed overhead, 3 rapid pops, followed by a shimmer of red and gold. Fireworks, a premature salute from the town's overenthusiastic technician. People around them gasped and pointed, some clapping, some startled. Greg flinched and looked up instinctively. Just a second, maybe 2. When he looked back, Lily was gone. At first, he thought she'd just moved further down the curb. He stepped forward, scanning faces. Jamie was still there, alone now, blinking in confusion. Greg's heart dropped into his stomach. "Where's Lily?" he asked. Jamie looked up, the beads of her own necklace clutched tightly in one hand. "She was just here," she whispered. Greg's voice caught. "Lily?" He turned in a full circle, panic blooming in his chest. "Lily!" But the parade kept moving. The drums beat on. The crowd cheered. And somewhere in the chaos, a little girl had vanished. The moment Greg's voice cracked above the crowd, sharp, panicked, desperate, was as if a switch had been thrown. Caroline turned, eyes darting between his face and the empty space where Lily had just been. Her stomach flipped as if gravity had shifted. She dropped the juice box, barely noticing the splash against her sandal. "Lily?" she called, louder than she meant to. People turned, heads swiveled. A few curious onlookers paused their cheering, confused by the sudden urgency in the couple's voices. Greg pushed past a group of teenagers draped in American flag capes, scanning every child's face, every flicker of red and white in the sea of movement. "She was right there," Jamie kept saying, her voice small, trembling. "She just wanted to see the float." Caroline knelt in front of her niece, gripping her shoulders gently. "Which way did she go, Jamie? Did she say anything? Did someone talk to her?" Jamie's lip quivered. She shook her head. Within minutes, a police officer working parade security had been flagged down. Then another. Radios crackled to life, and the music and laughter of the parade began to sound garish, discordant. Caroline felt her lungs seize with every breath, her eyes skimming past faces too quickly to register any of them. Greg's voice called Lily's name again and again, louder each time, but the only response was the rumble of drums and the crush of people still unaware of the growing horror. By late afternoon the parade was over, the floats long gone, and Maple Street was cordoned off with yellow tape. Police moved methodically through the crowd, gathering names, asking questions. Volunteers combed the nearby side streets. An officer led a bloodhound on a taut leash, its nose low to the pavement, circling the area where Lily was last seen. The sun blazed mercilessly above, but Caroline barely noticed the heat. Sweat soaked through her shirt as she moved with the searchers, numb and silent. Someone found a red balloon caught in the iron grate of a storm drain 4 blocks away. Greg stared at it like it might answer him, the curling ribbon still clutched tight in its plastic knot. His hand trembled as he reached down to touch it, but the balloon slipped deeper into the shadows with the wind, vanishing like a whisper. They searched through dusk and well past midnight, flashlights sweeping through bushes, crawl spaces, and trash bins. They called her name until their voices gave out. But the only things they found were shadows, silence, and no trace of a strawberry dress. By the following morning, Summer Hill was unrecognizable. The red, white, and blue decorations still fluttered on porches and light poles, but their brightness felt garish now, like a party hat left behind at the scene of a funeral. The town square, once pulsing with celebration, had been transformed into the nucleus of a full-scale investigation. News vans lined the curb. Uniformed officers moved through the streets with a purposeful heaviness, their clipped voices on radios slicing through the air. Yellow tape cordoned off everything: benches, sidewalks, storefronts, as if the whole town was a crime scene. Detective Ellen Price arrived before sunrise. Sharp-featured and quiet, she listened more than she spoke, watching the way people flinched when they mentioned Lily's name. Her notepad filled quickly, overheard arguments, nervous glances, vague recollections that led nowhere. She knew how these things unfolded. The first 48 hours were everything. After that, kids vanished into myths. They started with the obvious. A local performer named Snappy the Clown had worked the parade for years, juggling pins and handing out balloon animals with a paint-smeared smile. Someone reported seeing him near Lily and Jamie just before the disappearance. Snapper real name Alan Hurst was brought in for questioning. He looked smaller without the costume, a wiry man in his 50s who smelled like grease paint and peppermints. His hands shook as he spoke. "I remember the girls," he said. "The one in the strawberry dress waved at me. I gave her a balloon. That's all." His alibi checked out. Dozens of witnesses confirmed he'd stayed near the fountain the entire parade. Next, they found a man with a bulky camcorder, a tourist from Jefferson City who'd been filming the floats. When they reviewed his tapes, they saw Lily for a moment, blurry but unmistakable, tugging Jamie forward through the crowd. Then the screen jerked. Panned skyward, he'd been startled by the premature fireworks. When the camera steadied again, Lily was no longer in frame. The drifter was harder. He had no name, just a beard, a bedroll, and a habit of muttering to himself. Several witnesses swore they saw him lurking near the float staging area. When officers tracked him to a wooded stretch behind the old train depot, he seemed surprised by the attention. "Don't want your girl," he grumbled. "Don't even like children." He had no history, no ID, but also no evidence linking him to Lily. Just a half-eaten sandwich and a worn Bible in his bag. One by one, the possibilities collapsed under scrutiny. And by dusk, as the sun dipped behind the courthouse and shadows lengthened across the sidewalks, the truth settled like dust in the heat. No one had seen where she went. Only that she was gone. In the weeks that followed, the house on Finch Street lost its sound. The laughter that once spilled down the staircase, the rush of the front door opening with Lily's breathless return from school, the clatter of breakfast plates and humming from the kitchen gone. Silence draped itself over the Wentworth home like dust settling after a collapse. Caroline moved through the days like someone walking underwater. She washed Lily's clothes on Sundays, even though there was no dirt on them. She folded them neatly and placed them back in her daughter's drawers, smoothing the fabric with trembling hands. At night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, one hand always resting on the empty side of the bed where Lily had sometimes curled up during thunderstorms. She didn't cry anymore. The tears had run out 2 weeks in. What replaced them was something quieter, harder. "She knew him," Caroline said one evening, staring into her untouched cup of tea. "Whoever took her. She wasn't the type to go with a stranger. She was careful." Greg looked up from the armchair, the newspaper in his lap crumpled, unread. "Caroline." "She didn't scream," she said more firmly now. "No one heard a scream. You don't just vanish in a crowd without a sound unless—" "Please." She turned to face him, her eyes hollow. "It was someone she trusted, someone who smiled at her, who told her it was okay." Greg stood slowly, the muscles in his shoulders tense beneath his shirt. "You need to stop this." "I'm not going to stop," she said. "Someone we know, someone in this town took our daughter." Greg slammed the paper down. "She's gone, Caroline, she's gone." The words echoed in the quiet, and for a moment, Caroline just stared at him. Then she turned away. Greg had stopped checking the flyers. He no longer returned the calls from tip lines or the police. He avoided the mailbox entirely, as if it might contain more silence folded into envelopes. His world had narrowed to the fireplace and the worn recliner in the corner of the living room, the place where Lily used to sit on his lap and ask for one more story before bed. He kept a glass of whiskey by his side now, even before noon. When Caroline began taking down names of every man who had ever looked at Lily too long in the supermarket, Greg stopped listening. He had already buried her in his heart. She hadn't. Not yet. The first year, Caroline stood on the same curb where Lily had disappeared, gripping a poster board with her daughter's photo taped to it. The edges were curling in the July heat, and the ink was beginning to fade where her fingers pressed. A local reporter interviewed her briefly. She wore the same strawberry print dress Lily had loved, now carefully altered to fit her frame, and said, "If someone knows something, please, just come forward." People nodded politely. Some wept. Others crossed the street to avoid her. Greg stayed home, watching the news with the volume turned low, a bottle of bourbon resting like a paperweight on the remote. The second year, she brought flyers, handed them out to parade-goers like coupons. "Have you seen my daughter?" printed in bold above Lily's third-grade photo. A man asked her gently if she had considered moving on. She didn't answer, just offered him a flyer with a tight-lipped smile. He didn't take it. By year 5, the signs were laminated, weatherproofed, professionally printed. She had added a note at the bottom, "Last seen July 4th, 2006, wearing a white dress with red strawberries." Holding a balloon. Each detail a wound she refused to let scar. Greg hadn't been to the parade since that first awful summer. He stopped pretending he might go somewhere else that day. Instead, he sat in the garage with the door open, radio playing static-laced blues, watching the shadows shift across the driveway. When the fireworks started, he turned the volume up. Year 10 brought a vigil, candles, balloons released into the sky that disappeared behind clouds as if they too had been taken. Caroline spoke softly into a microphone and read one of Lily's old poems, scrawled in marker and covered in glitter about wanting to become a butterfly. When she finished, she looked up as if Lily might be perched on a rooftop, watching. The years became harder to count. 17, 18. People no longer recognized her on sight. The posters changed with age progression images, the smile digitally lengthened, the eyes darkened by time and guesswork. Caroline aged in reverse, growing thinner, quieter, more skeletal in her hope. On the 19th 4th of July she stood alone again. No camera crews, no flyers left, just the old laminated sign, now yellowing, and a lawn chair behind her where no one ever sat. When the floats passed by, she did not wave. She only searched the faces. All of them. Every single one. On the 10th anniversary of Lily Wentworth's disappearance, Summerhill's quiet streets stirred with a flicker of outside attention. A morning news segment out of St. Louis ran a piece titled, "10 Years Gone, The Girl in the Strawberry Dress." Old footage played, balloons, a crowd, a voiceover reciting facts like they were parts of a riddle never solved. Caroline appeared on camera, thinner now, her voice steadier than anyone expected. Greg refused the interview. He said he didn't want to be a prop for tragedy. The anchor closed the story by saying, "Someone out there knows what happened." It felt both true and useless. For a brief moment, Lily's name floated back into national conversation. Talk shows called. One podcast included her case in an episode titled "Vanished at the Parade," but the flurry of exposure melted quickly, like ice under a July sun. No new leads surfaced, no mysterious caller stepped forward. Just recycled theories from strangers, online armchair detectives, circling the same tired possibilities, their usernames arguing over timelines and maps. Caroline answered every message. One day, a package arrived at the house, no return address. Inside was a delicate pink sweater, child-sized, and a note written in swirling cursive, "She's still close. I can feel her." A week later, the psychic came. She called herself Madame Celine and drove from Iowa in a rusted van covered in decals of moons and crystal symbols. She asked to sit in Lily's bedroom. Caroline allowed it, desperate for something, anything. The woman closed her eyes and whispered things like vibrations and tide spirits and a presence near water. She held Lily's comb to her chest like it might still be warm. Greg walked out halfway through. "She's alive," Celine said at last, eyes fluttering open. "But she doesn't know who she is anymore." It was hope shaped like poison. Caroline clung to it for weeks. Detective Ellen Price, now retired and grayer, still drove into town once a month and stopped by the station. She flipped through Lily's file, hands slow and deliberate, dozens of pages. Interviews, tips, dead ends. The paper was worn, dog-eared, smudged with old coffee. There hadn't been anything new in years. The case remained open, technically. But in practice, it had gone still. No suspects, no sightings, no updates. Just a cold file in a metal drawer. and a mother who refused to shut it. The drone lifted into the air with a soft mechanical hum, rising above the rooftops of Summerhill's east side. It was just past 6 in the evening, early June, the light still golden and long. Tyler Nash, 26, newly licensed real estate agent with more ambition than clients, stood in an empty gravel lot with his phone in hand, guiding the drone higher. He was practicing footage angles for a fixer-upper he planned to list the next week. An abandoned textile warehouse 3 blocks from Main Street, roof sagging, bricks stained with rust, the kind of place everyone in town passed, but no one thought about anymore. From above, the building looked worse. Chunks of roofing curled at the corners like burnt paper. Windows were boarded up or broken. Tyler adjusted the tilt of the drone's camera, sweeping slowly over the rooftop. He was about to swing back toward the parking lot when something flickered at the corner of the screen. He stopped the feed, reversed. There it was again. Standing near the edge of the roof, half shrouded in the shadow of an old ventilation duct, was a girl, small-framed, pale, wearing what looked like a white dress. Her arms hung straight at her sides. Her hair was long, light brown, maybe lighter in the sunlight. She wasn't moving, just standing there, looking straight ahead, not up, not at the drone. Her face unreadable. Tyler stared at the screen. He hadn't seen anyone go in or out of the building. There were no cars nearby. The building wasn't even safe to enter, technically condemned. He zoomed in, the pixelation thickening. The dress had patterned spots. No, strawberries, tiny ones, faded but still there. His heart dropped into his shoes. It was probably a squatter, a runaway maybe, or some kid playing daredevil. But something about the way she stood motionless, precise, unsettled him. Like a portrait brought to life, or a memory made solid. He saved the footage and packed up his gear without looking back at the building. The sun dipped lower behind it, casting the girl into a silhouette. When he checked the drone's live feed again before powering it down, she was gone. Tyler didn't sleep that night. By morning, the video was uploaded to his private folder and sent to a friend at the local news station. It took less than 24 hours for someone to comment, "Isn't that Lily Wentworth's dress, the one from the missing posters?" And just like that, Summerhill remembered. Maggie Holcomb had been a local reporter in Summerhill for nearly 2 decades, long enough to cover the original story when Lily Wentworth vanished into the crowd like a breath exhaled and lost. She remembered the panic, the press conferences, the late-night updates outside the police station where no one ever had anything new to say. She remembered the way Caroline's voice cracked when she begged the town to look again. Maggie still had the missing poster pinned to a corkboard behind her desk. Lily's second-grade photo, wide smile, one baby tooth still missing. When the drone footage came across her inbox, sent anonymously but with coordinates and a timestamp, Maggie opened it expecting another crackpot lead. Her cursor hovered over the play button, disinterested. Then she clicked. The girl on the roof was frozen in the frame like she'd been painted there. Still as stone, white dress caught in a whisper of wind, her figure just distant enough to keep her face indistinct. Maggie paused the video and zoomed in until the pixels bled together, but it didn't matter. Her eyes weren't looking at the face. They were fixed on the pattern. Tiny red strawberries. She stood up so fast her office chair rolled back into the bookshelf. Within minutes, she was sifting through a file box marked 2006, 2 missing, flipping past articles and photos until she found the original image Caroline had handed her all those years ago. Lily in her strawberry dress, standing in front of a balloon arch at the county fair, one hand shielding her eyes from the sun, the same cap sleeves, the same red stitching on the collar. Maggie held the drone still and the old photo side by side, her breath catching in her throat. It couldn't be a coincidence. She wrote the piece fast, heart pounding. The girl on the roof. Could this be Lily Wentworth, missing since 2006? She embedded the footage, attached the old photo, and uploaded the article to the station's website. By noon, the story had spread beyond Missouri. By nightfall, it was on national networks. Comments flooded in. People argued in all caps about patterns, pixels, and possibility. Some said it was a cruel prank. Others swore it was proof of abduction, of survival, of something darker. And in the center of it all, unmoving, was a girl in a crumbling building wearing the same dress she wore the day she vanished 19 years earlier. The drone footage played on a loop in the cramped briefing room at the Summerhill Police Department. It was projected onto a blank white wall, the grainy clip beginning again each time the girl in the strawberry dress disappeared behind the rooftop ventilation shaft. There were no camera angles to change, no zoom that could bring her face into clarity, and yet, something about the stillness of her, the strange poise, refused to be dismissed. Detective Monica Reyes stood with her arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the screen as though willing it to change. Beside her, Detective Sam Durant flipped through the original case file Lily's disappearance from the 4th of July parade 19 years ago. He ran a hand through his hair, then stopped on the photo of the dress. Strawberry print. The same one, or an identical copy. Either possibility made his stomach turn. This was scheduled to be torn down next week, Reyes said, not looking away from the projection. Warehouse was condemned in 2015. The demolition crew already started fencing the property. We're lucky that kid with the drone didn't wait another day. Durant closed the file slowly. So what do you think? Someone playing a sick prank with a look-alike? A squatter in a vintage dress? He said it without conviction. Reyes didn't answer right away. She stepped forward, pausing the video. The girl on the rooftop froze again in the center of the wall. Her arms were at her sides. Her head tilted slightly, almost like she was listening to something no one else could hear. "I think it's her," Reyes said softly. Durant didn't argue. Not yet. They made the call to the county office to halt demolition. The mayor didn't like I've been pushing to replace the east side eyesore with a memorial park for years, but Reyes pushed harder. Within hours, the orange fencing came down, and officers taped off the entire block. A forensic team was dispatched. Flashlights began sweeping through the sagging hallways and splintered stairwells of the warehouse as the sun set behind it. Outside, Caroline Wentworth stood with a photo of Lily clutched against her chest. Greg stayed behind, watching from the car. Neither of them said a word. As darkness crept across the rooftop, there was no sign of the girl, but the door to the roof, rusted, sealed for years, was found unlatched. Open. Just a crack, just enough. The lock on the back door of the warehouse gave with a metallic snap, rusted through at the hinge and so brittle it crumbled under the bolt cutters. The air inside was stale and dense, thick with the smell of mildew, damp wood, and something older like dust and rot woven together over time. The building, once a textile plant that shuttered in the late 80s, had long since become part of Summerhill's forgotten landscape. The kind of place kids dared each other to sneak into on Halloween, the kind of place adults drove past without turning their heads. Detective Monica Reyes stepped in first, her flashlight cutting a sharp white cone through the dark. Sam Durant followed, boots crunching on a layer of broken glass and fallen plaster. The silence inside was absolute. They moved carefully through the main floor, weaving between rusted machines half covered in tarps and draped with spider webs that shimmered when the light caught them. Graffiti sprawled across the walls, mostly names, curse words, an occasional half-hearted pentagram, but deeper in, the marks began to change. Symbols. Not the usual teenage nonsense. These were etched deliberately, symmetrical and foreign, drawn in charcoal or possibly ash, circles within circles, eye shapes, slashes through loops. Some had been traced multiple times, layered until they seemed almost carved into the wall. "What the hell is this?" Durant muttered, running his fingers over one of the symbols. It flaked away in dry smudges. They found the room 2 floors up, in a corner of the building where the roof had partially collapsed, but still held just enough to keep out the rain. The mattress was on the floor, thin and warped with age. A sleeping bag had been stretched across it like a sheet, and beside it sat a plastic milk crate holding a cracked flashlight, 3 books with worn covers, and a tin of crackers, half empty. The food was recent enough to have mold, but not decay. Someone had been here. The far wall was papered with children's drawings, hundreds of them, overlapping and curling at the corners. crayon and pencil, chalk, even some drawn directly onto the wall. Smiling suns, flowers, blue skies, but others, less so. A girl with hollow eyes, a tall man with no face, a house underground, buried beneath tangled roots. Reyes knelt beside a drawing taped near the bottom, a crude heart drawn in red. Inside it, one word: Lily. Outside, the sun sank behind the rooftops of Summerhill, and the warehouse swallowed the light whole. The results came back on a Tuesday afternoon, sealed in a manila envelope and delivered with the kind of hushed urgency usually reserved for verdicts or death notices. Detective Reyes didn't open it at her desk. She walked the folder down the hall and into the file room, shut the door behind her, and peeled the flap back with careful fingers. DNA match. 99.9% certainty. The hair found on the brush from the plastic milk crate in the warehouse was Lily Wentworth's. She exhaled slowly, pressing the paper to her chest like it might warm her. Then she made the call. By morning, the town was unrecognizable. News vans lined the courthouse lawn. Reporters leaned over barriers, cameras on their shoulders like weapons. Headlines ran wild. Missing girl alive? Lily Wentworth evidence found after 19 years. The whispers that had quietly passed from neighbor to neighbor for almost 2 decades now spilled out of mouths with microphones. Summerhill had become a spectacle. Caroline watched it all from the couch, arms wrapped around her knees like a girl too small for the chair. The television blinked with her daughter's school photo Lily, with the gap-toothed grin, hair in uneven pigtails, cheeks pink from a field day sun. They paired it now with blurry drone footage of a girl on a rooftop, and Caroline studied the side-by-side obsessively, frame by frame. It was her. It had to be. Sleep stopped visiting after that. She roamed the house at night, drifting through rooms like a ghost. She pulled old drawings out of drawers, ran her hands over Lily's faded handwriting, whispered her name under her breath, just to hear it spoken. She didn't eat. She barely spoke. She listened. For footsteps. For a voice. For anything. Greg didn't turn on the television. He didn't go near the warehouse. When Caroline told him about the DNA, his jaw tightened, and he simply said no. "She's alive," Caroline whispered. "She's not," he snapped. "You saw what they found. You saw those drawings. That's not a child's room. That's a prison." But she shook her head. "Someone kept her," she said, "all this time." Greg walked out of the room. And in the silence that followed, the only sound left in the house was the ceiling fan turning above them round and round and round, like the years that had spun in place, always coming back to the day their daughter vanished into a crowd and never came home. The gas station across from the warehouse had a single working security camera mounted above the ice machine, its lens weathered and clouded at the edges from years of dust and summer heat. It wasn't much, but it pointed directly at the intersection and, just enough of the warehouse's crumbling facade was caught in frame to matter. Detective Sam Durant reviewed the footage in the station's back office, the gas station manager peering over his shoulder, sipping a bottle of orange soda with loud, wet gulps. The footage was pulled from the past 2 weeks, but it didn't take long before something caught Durant's eye. The first figure appeared at 9:16 p.m. on a Tuesday. Hood up, shoulders hunched, walking quickly across the cracked street. They passed directly under the street lamp, but angled their head just so face obscured by the brim of a baseball cap and the sag of a hoodie. The grainy footage turned them into a shadow. They went straight to the warehouse's side entrance, pulled open the rusted metal door, and disappeared inside. 12 minutes later, they emerged, holding nothing. No bags, no tools, not even a phone. They looked both ways before crossing the street and vanished beyond the camera's view. Durant fast-forwarded to the next visit. Then the next. The same pattern. Same time, same stride, always alone, 3 nights a week, always between 9 and 10, always leaving empty-handed. He called Reyes. They sat side by side in the darkened viewing room, the footage now slowed to half speed. On the 7th appearance, something different happened. As the figure exited the building, they paused near the edge of the sidewalk. Their head turned not toward the street, but toward the roof. They stood like that for a moment, perfectly still, as if waiting, as if listening. Then they turned and walked away. "Could be a squatter," Reyes said softly, but her voice lacked conviction. "Could be someone who thinks she's dead, someone watching over a grave." "Or someone watching over her," Durant replied. Still, they checked the footage from the camera's audio feed, but there was nothing, just wind, static, the distant hum of traffic. Outside the warehouse, officers moved carefully through the building's guts, calling in every scrap, every smear, every trace. But the only living person confirmed to have entered that building in recent weeks was the one they couldn't identify. The one who never showed their face. Marion Elwood had been packing up boxes for the assisted living facility when she found it. She sat cross-legged on the floor of her attic, the summer heat rising like breath from the insulation. A dozen composition notebooks sat in a stack beside her, covered in dust, their covers faded and peeling. She'd always let her students keep their writing journals if they wanted to. The ones who forgoed her didn't care she kept in a bin, labeled Creative Writing 1995, 2009. She opened the first one by habit, a boy's story about flying cows. The next had spelling lists and lists of dreams, equal parts unhinged and tender. But it was the third book that made her pause. On the inside cover, in purple ink, was a name, Lucy W. No last name, just an initial. The handwriting was careful, looped in the exaggerated style of a child taught to take pride in every letter. Marion didn't remember the name, not exactly, but she remembered the year. 2007. That class. The one that came after the parade. The one where grief hung over everything like fog. She flipped through the pages. The entries weren't like the others. The first pages were normal enough. Stories about a rabbit who could time travel. A girl who found coins in the woods that let her talk to birds. But by the middle of the notebook, something shifted. The girl in the stories stopped going outside. She wrote about a cold house under the roof and a woman called Other Mom, who whispered lullabies with no words in them. There were stories about rules. Don't open the window, don't sing too loud, and never ever go to the top step after midnight. One passage read, "If I remember my real name, she gets angry, so I don't remember." Then, the drawings. They were rough and smeared in places, as if erased and redrawn again and again, a girl with long brown hair and a dress covered in small red dots, a man with no face, always standing in doorways. A trapdoor with a padlock drawn over and over until the page nearly tore. Marion sat with the notebook in her lap for a long time. When she called the police station, she wasn't sure how to explain it. "I think I have something," she said carefully, "that might belong to Lily Wentworth." Then she added, as though saying it aloud made it more real, "or at least to the girl who forgot that's who she was." The house across from the warehouse had belonged to Walter Greeley since 1971. He was the kind of man who sat on his porch most afternoons with a thermos of sweet tea and a notebook for crossword puzzles he never finished. His knees were bad and his eyes worse, but he noticed things, especially things that didn't belong. When the police came knocking, he was slow to the door, the screen creaking open before the inner knob even turned. He eyed the badge on Detective Reyes's belt, then nodded once, already knowing why they were there. "You're about 20 years too late," he said, not unkindly. Reyes introduced herself and explained that they were reopening the Lily Wentworth case. Walter didn't blink. He pointed to the rocker beside him. "I used to see a man out there," he said, settling back into his seat. "Not often, but regular enough to remember." Reyes sat. "Tell me." Walter lifted the thermos and took a long sip, then wiped the sweat from his brow with a trembling hand. "Gray van," he began. "Old Chevy, maybe mid-90s. Parked across the street from the warehouse every few days for years, never stayed more than an hour or two, usually late, after sundown. I don't sleep too well, so I'd sit out here. He never got out of the car, just sat there, real still. Engine off, lights off." He paused, searching his memory like rifling through old drawers. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, like the kind you'd wear to fish, but not floppy. Firm edges, pulled down low. I never saw his face, not once. Reyes leaned forward slightly. How many years did this go on? Walter shrugged. Hard to say. I noticed it more after 7. Could have been longer. Van disappeared maybe a year or 2 ago, just stopped coming. Did you ever call it in? Sure did. Once. Told a deputy about it at the diner. He said it was probably just some junkie sleeping off a high or a man cheating on his wife with the engine off to save gas. I stopped mentioning it after that. Reyes looked out toward the warehouse. The building loomed in the afternoon haze, quiet and still. But she could almost see the van there, now parked neatly, anonymous, patient. He was watching that place, Walter said. But not like a man who's curious. Like a man who's waiting for something to happen, or maybe making sure it didn't. She nodded, scribbled in her notebook, and stood. Thank you, Mr. Greeley. He nodded once, already turning back to his puzzle, murmuring, 5 letters, disappeared. The basement floor of the warehouse had buckled in one corner, revealing a jagged crack that led to something deeper than mere foundation damage. At first, the forensic team thought it was nothing, just structural decay, the natural sag of a century-old building settling unevenly into the earth. But when a cadaver dog began barking furiously at the edge of the fracture, everything shifted. Detectives Reyes and Durant returned to the scene the next morning with a structural engineer and a narrow-frame camera. What they found was a tunnel winding carved into the dirt by hand and time. Its walls were reinforced in places with rotting timber, the kind used during Prohibition when smugglers ran liquor beneath Summerhill's streets. We thought these collapsed decades ago, the engineer said quietly, his voice trailing off as Reyes disappeared into the opening. The tunnels stretched under the warehouse and beyond, like veins beneath the town. Old maps confirmed a network of them, some connecting to former speakeasies, others to now demolished factories and storefronts. Most had caved in or flooded long ago, but not this one. This one was alive. The deeper they went, the more signs emerged. Faint footprints in the dirt, narrow enough to belong to a child. Scattered food wrappers, flattened tin cans, even an empty bottle of cough syrup wedged into a stone crevice like a makeshift shelf. A string of Christmas lights, dim but somehow still functional, had been threaded along one tunnel wall, powered by an old car battery. The glow flickered with each passing breath of air. Then, the room. It wasn't a room in the traditional sense, more of a chamber hollowed out where several tunnels converged. In the center sat a twin-sized mattress, bare springs exposed on one side. Around it, piles of blankets, stacked books, and a child's pink flashlight, whose bulb still cast a dim circle of light against the far wall. And on that wall, more drawings. Hundreds, no, thousands, taped, pinned, scratched into the dirt. They repeated the same symbols seen in the warehouse above loops, slashes, eyes, hearts, but interspersed between them were faces. A girl with long brown hair, a woman with silver eyes and outstretched arms, a man in a hat, always watching from the edge of the frame. Someone lived down here, Durant said, voice hollow. For years. Reyes stepped closer to the mattress. On top of it, perfectly folded, was the strawberry print dress, clean, pressed, waiting. The silence in the tunnel was total, and it was listening. The mailbox was wedged into a crooked post near the tunnel's dead end, rust having eaten through most of the latch so that the lid hung open like a yawn. It wasn't connected to any home or street above, just sitting there in the dark like it had always belonged, buried beneath the world. Reyes found it while sweeping the furthest chamber, her flashlight beam catching on something red poking out from inside. She knelt slowly, her breath fogging in the cold subterranean air, and pulled it free. A folded piece of lined paper, worn soft as fabric, the words written in thick, wavering crayon strokes. The letters were wide, uncertain, drawn by someone with small hands and no ruler. Dear Mom, I miss you. Are you still mad that I left? I didn't mean to. I got lost. Please don't be sad. I'm being good. I'm learning to be quiet. Love. Lily. Reyes froze. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the lid wider. Inside were dozens more, folded, some sealed with scraps of tape or stickers, others crumpled and tear-stained. Some were addressed, Mom, Caroline Wentworth, my real home. Some had no name at all, just hearts and flowers scribbled across the backs. They weren't dated, but the handwriting changed over time. The earliest were childlike block letters, spelling mistakes, uneven spacing. Later ones were more fluid, more desperate. Dear Mommy, I made a picture of you today. You had red hair and a yellow sweater. The lady said you're far away, but maybe you can see me when I draw. Can you? Dear Mom, the man says I can't send these, but I pretend anyway. I hide them after he sleeps. I don't think he looks in the box. It's just ours. Dear Mom, do you think of me on the 4th of July? I try not to cry on that day. He doesn't like it when I remember. Some letters were unfinished, the words trailing off mid-sentence as if she'd been interrupted, or simply run out of strength. Dear Mom, if I ever see you again, I'll say sorry for not holding your hand tighter. I'll say, that one ended in a smear of purple crayon, a tear blotched into the paper. Reyes gathered every letter with gloved hands, placing them one by one into an evidence box like relics or prayers. Above ground, Caroline sat by the window, watching the sun rise with a blanket around her shoulders. She didn't know why, but her chest hurt like someone had just whispered her name through stone. The letter was one of the last they let her read. Detective Reyes had warned her gently, voice low, eyes cautious. Some of the language might be upsetting, she said, placing the envelope on the kitchen table like it might bruise if dropped too hard. Caroline nodded, already reaching for it with trembling fingers, as if she might absorb its contents just by touching the creased paper. The handwriting was familiar now. Crayon, red, a little neater than the earlier letters, but still jagged in the way only a child could write, like each word was being learned in real time. Dear Mom, there's another mom here. She's not like you. She says she's better. She brings me food and sings with no words. Sometimes I forget your face. She tells me that's okay. She says you stopped looking. Caroline's chest tightened, her mouth parting in a soundless breath. She calls it the quiet room. It doesn't have windows. She says it helps when the noise gets too loud in my head. I don't like the dark, but she says the dark likes me. She makes me draw her. I try to draw you instead. There were small doodles in the margin zone of a girl sitting on a stool, surrounded by black scribbles. Another of two women, one smiling, one with empty circles for eyes. Caroline's hand hovered over them, her knuckles pale, her breath sharp and uneven. I asked her if you're still waiting. She said no. She said you forgot. I cried and she didn't like that. I slept in the quiet room again. The page blurred. Caroline blinked hard, trying to hold the lines in focus, but the words swam. She pressed her palm to her chest as if she could press the ache back inside. Her chair scraped against the tile as she pushed it back, staggering upright. Can't, she whispered, voice cracked. I can't. Greg reached for her, but she shook him off, stumbling out of the kitchen, into the hallway, then to the stairs where she dropped to her knees as if her bones had turned to water. Her hands clutched the banister like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. She thought I forgot her, she sobbed. All those years and she thought I stopped waiting. Upstairs, the bedroom still looked the same. Lily's bed made, posters on the walls, a lamp with faded butterflies. Caroline crawled into it and buried her face in the pillow, crying until the light outside turned the walls gray and silent. The letter lay open on the table. The last words had been underlined 3 times, the red crayon pressed deep into the paper. Please remember me. Please remember me. Please remember me. The confession came quietly, dropped like a stone into still water. Greg sat in the back corner of the police station, his elbows on his knees, hands clasped as if in prayer. He looked older than he had, even days before, shoulders slumped, face hollowed out by sleepless nights and memories sharpening at the edges. Detective Durant sat across from him, notepad resting idle in his lap. He didn't press. He didn't need to. Greg had called the meeting himself. It was the week before the parade, Greg began, voice low, like he was talking through a closed door. Summer had just started. Lily was out of school. Caroline and we weren't doing well. There were arguments, quiet ones, at night, you know the kind. Durant nodded once. She was tired all the time. I was tired of trying. That's not an excuse, Greg said quickly, lifting his eyes. Just a fact. He paused, swallowed hard, then looked away again. Her name was Rose McKinley, lived 2 blocks from Maine, one of those brick bungalows behind the library. We met at the hardware store. She said I had kind eyes. I said something about her garden. It didn't last long. A few weeks, coffee, a few nights, but it was real enough to be shameful. Durant leaned forward. Did she ever meet Lily? Greg shook his head. No. God, no. It wasn't like that. I kept the 2 parts of my life apart. I was careful. I thought I was. He ran a hand over his face, the stubble rasping under his palm. I ended it the day after the parade. That night, actually, after Lily disappeared. It felt like like the world was punishing me for something. For stepping outside the line. I remember thinking that, in the moment. That I'd traded my daughter's life for something cheap and fleeting. Durant was quiet, his pen still untouched. We never told Caroline, Greg added, eyes burning. Not then, not now. She thinks it was just distance. She never asked if it was someone else. I think maybe she always knew. Durant finally spoke. Did Rose know about Lily's disappearance? Greg hesitated. She sent me a card, a few days after. Said she was sorry. Said she hoped Lily came home. Then nothing after that. I never saw her again. Where is she now? Greg looked up, eyes dark and hollow. She died years ago. 2013, I think. Car accident. I read it in the paper. Outside, the clouds broke apart slowly, light coming through in strips across the pavement. But inside, Greg just sat there, quiet, a man staring into the space his mistakes had carved open and finding no way out. The house on Sycamore Street had long since surrendered to time. The porch sagged like a held breath, its paint blistered and flaking under years of Missouri sun. Wind chimes hung from a rusted hook by the front window, their melody dulled by dust. The grass in the yard grew in stubborn patches, tall enough in places to hide the bottom half of the old for sale sign, leaning sideways near the curb. Rose McKinley's name had stopped appearing in the Summerhill conversation years ago. After the accident head-on collision on a back road during a spring storm there, hadn't been much said beyond the obituary. She had no children, no husband, just a brother who never gave interviews, never answered reporters, and never changed his number. His name was Dale. Reyes and Durant found him sitting on the porch steps of the vacant house, smoking a cigarette with slow, practiced drags, as if every inhale had its own memory. He wore a trucker cap and a jacket too heavy for the weather. A red cooler sat beside him with no clear purpose. "You the cops?" he asked as they approached. He didn't look surprised. Reyes introduced herself. Dale nodded like he already knew. "We're reopening the Lily Wentworth case," she said carefully. "We have reason to believe your sister may have known something," Dale finished for her. "Yeah, I always wondered." Reyes tilted her head. "You did?" Dale tapped ash onto the step. "Rose had moods. You could feel 'em before she even spoke. Sometimes she'd vanish for days. Said she was helping someone. But she never said who." He paused. "I remember the week that girl went missing. Rose stayed locked in this house for 3 days straight, wouldn't even answer the door." "Did you ask her why?" Durant asked. "Sure. She told me some people don't want to be found. Said I wouldn't understand." Reyes looked toward the warehouse just beyond the backyard. Only a chain-link fence separated the 2 properties. From an upstairs window, you'd have a perfect view of the roof. "Did you ever go inside the warehouse?" Dale shook his head. "Place always gave me the creeps. But Rose, she'd stare at it like it was breathing." Inside the house, dust coated every surface. The furniture was covered in sheets like old ghosts. In the hallway closet, Beneath a pile of books, Reyes found a box labeled LW, with children's barrettes, a worn paperback of Charlotte's Web, and a red shoelace tied in a bow. The house had been silent for 10 years. But someone had remembered. Someone had come back. Because the porch light was on. And there was no electricity. The cellar door groaned as it opened, revealing steep wooden steps that descended into darkness. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and old mold. Reyes pulled a cord that dangled above her head, and a single bulb flickered to life, casting a pale yellow glow across the basement floor. The room was unfinished concrete walls, shelves stacked with jars of dusty preserves, boxes sagging with forgotten belongings, but it was what lay beyond the furnace that stopped her. A cabinet, padlocked, hidden behind an old shelving unit that had to be dragged aside, the legs scraping painfully across the concrete. Durant cut the lock with bolt cutters and opened it slowly. Inside were videotapes. Dozens. Maybe more. Each one labeled in the same tidy handwriting, with precise dates and single letters L 2007, L 2012, L winter. Some were stacked neatly, others tossed into the back of the cabinet as if discarded in haste. On the shelf above them sat a small portable television with a built-in VCR, its surface coated in grime. Reyes pulled one tape from the pile, hands gloved. The label read, July 4th, rehearsal. She and Durant exchanged a glance. They plugged in the television. It hissed to life, the screen flickering, static dancing across the surface before the tape settled into view. The footage was shaky at first, a hand adjusting the angle. Then it came into focus. A girl stood in the middle of a living room, dimly lit, cluttered with throw pillows and faded curtains. She couldn't have been older than 9. Her hair was long, braided unevenly, and she wore the strawberry print dress, the same one. Her hands were clenched at her sides. A woman's voice spoke from behind the camera. "Now again, Lily, you know what to say." The girl nodded. Her voice was soft but rehearsed. "I got lost. I don't remember the noise. I just woke up here. She's my real mom now. This is where I live." "Good," the woman's voice said. "Now again," with a smile. The girl blinked at the camera, then tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Reyes hit pause. They watched more tapes: birthdays with no cake, Christmas mornings with no tree, the girl older in each one, always indoors. Always with that same flatness in her expression, as though her soul were being trained out of her, frame by frame. Durant leaned back, his mouth dry. "She wasn't just hidden here," he said quietly. "She was rewritten." The last tape they found had no label. Inside, the screen flickered once and showed a rooftop. A girl standing still in the wind. Waiting, watching, remembering. The sun hadn't yet crested the horizon when the call came in. A patrol car cruising near the east end of Maple Street spotted her first barefoot, walking slowly along the sidewalk near the warehouse, her arms folded tightly around herself like the morning air had seeped into her bones. Her dress was oversized and stained, her hair wild and matted in places, hanging in tangled waves past her shoulders. She moved like someone half asleep or freshly woken from a long, strange dream. The officer approached carefully, engine off, door open, calling out as he crossed the street. "Miss, are you all right? Can I help you?" She didn't look up, didn't flinch. She kept walking, slow, deliberate steps, feet dark with dust, toes curled slightly against the rough pavement. When he reached her, she stopped. Not from fear, not from recognition, just because something in her body seemed to know she'd reached the edge of something, the end of a road, or the beginning of another. She didn't speak. Instead, she hummed. It was faint at first, a soft, breathy melody that made no sense until he recognized it. Stars and Stripes Forever, the marching band version. The same one that played on that summer morning in 2006, the one blasting from the parade float speakers when Lily Wentworth vanished into the crowd. The tune drifted out of her like a ghost. By the time Reyes and Durant arrived, the girl was sitting on the curb, eyes fixed on nothing. She wasn't frightened, but she wasn't calm either. Her expression was blank, unreadable, a canvas wiped clean too many times. Durant knelt beside her, voice low and careful. "Do you know your name?" She didn't answer. Reyes sat on the other side. "We think you might be someone we've been looking for." Still, nothing. Just that soft hum, rising and falling like breath, a memory with a melody. The paramedics came next, speaking gently, wrapping her in a silver blanket that fluttered like foil in the breeze. She let them, silent, compliant. Only when the gurney wheeled past the warehouse did she pause, her head turning just slightly. Her voice was a whisper, hoarse and cracked from disuse. "Don't go in there," she said. "That place forgets you." It was the first thing she'd said in years, and it broke the morning open like glass. The hospital room was quiet, except for the scratch of crayon on paper. The woman sat cross-legged on the bed, knees pulled close, her back hunched slightly as she worked. A pile of blank printer paper rested beside her, and one by one she filled each sheet, no words, just images, always the same. Fireworks exploding above rooftop, swirling bursts in red and gold. Red balloons floating upward, sometimes tangled in branches, sometimes drifting alone. Some had strings attached, others didn't. She never looked up while she drew, never spoke. Only paused when her hand cramped, flexed her fingers, then kept going. Dr. Lena Harrow watched from the other side of the two-way mirror, arms folded, face unreadable. She'd worked with trauma patients for years, children who had lost everything, adults pulled from cults or war zones, but this was different. This was someone whose reality had been molded like wet clay, reshaped over nearly 2 decades into something unrecognizable. "They say her name is Lily," Dr. Harrow said, glancing toward the detectives beside her. "The DNA supports it. The birthmark matches. But in her mind, she's not her, not yet." Reyes nodded, eyes fixed on the woman behind the glass. "What is she now?" The doctor hesitated. "Someone who's survived by forgetting." Inside the room, the woman dropped her red crayon and picked up a blue one. She began to draw the outline of a dress white, with a thick red belt and tiny strawberries across the hem. She colored it slowly, methodically. The hands she gave the figure were small and open, reaching. She hadn't asked for a phone or a television. She didn't react to the photos detectives had shown her, pictures of Lily as a child, family portraits, the missing posters that once papered Summerhill. But the drawings kept coming, always the same themes, always that same quiet intensity, like she was translating something buried too deep for words. One evening, a nurse brought her a tray with dinner, and a small radio left playing in the background. The speakers crackled, then cut to a commercial. Then a tune began, brass heavy, fast, unmistakable. "Stars and Stripes Forever." The woman froze. Her crayon slipped from her hand. Her eyes darted to the window, then to the door. Her breathing changed. She stood and walked to the wall, not fast, not panicked. And in a soft voice, flat but certain, she said, "They played this when I disappeared." Then she sat down and began to draw again. This time, it was the back of a van, a wide-brimmed hat on the dash, and 2 eyes staring out from the darkness behind it. The tape was unmarked, its case dusty and brittle with age, found wedged behind the broken panel of a shelf in the cellar's far corner, like someone had hidden it in a panic and forgotten it existed. Reyes turned it over in her hands before sliding it into the portable VCR, the machine groaning to life with a whir and a flicker of static. The screen blinked once, then settled into the familiar grain of home video. But this time, there was no effort at composure, no rehearsals, no instructions whispered off camera. It began with Rose. She was younger than in her obituary photo, early 40s maybe, her long auburn hair pulled back in a tight braid, her eyes fever bright. She was facing the camera directly, seated in what looked like her basement. The walls behind her lined with mismatched blankets, like she was trying to smother the echoes. "I need to explain," she said, voice sharp, breathless. If anything happens to May, if they find this, I want it known I was only trying to protect her." She adjusted the camera slightly, and the view widened. Lily sat beside her. She couldn't have been more than 10. Pale, thin, her feet dangling above the floor. She looked not at the camera, but at Rose, her face blank, like a photograph in motion. "They're still out there," Rose whispered. "The fire monsters. They wear faces like people, but they're not. They took my son. They took everything." She turned to Lily, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear with a trembling hand. "But I won't let them take you." Lily didn't respond, just stared ahead, hands folded in her lap. The tape cut jumped. Now it showed a different Anglia camcorder placed somewhere higher. A journal open on Rose's lap, her finger following her own handwriting. She was murmuring something unintelligible. Occasionally, she looked up at the girl huddled on the mattress in the corner. "They said you'd cry," she said to her. "But you didn't. That means you understand. That means you know." The footage cut again. This time, Dale appeared. Standing behind Rose, arms crossed, his face drawn and exhausted. "You said just a few weeks," he muttered. "You said she needed to rest." "She does," Rose hissed. "She's safer here than anywhere else. Out there, they'd make her forget who she is. I'm the only one who remembers her now." Lily looked at the camera. Just once. And in that look was something ancient, older than her years, older than the dress she wore, older than the lie she'd been told every day of her stolen life. The screen went black. Then, silence. The recovery center sat on the outskirts of town, nestled behind a grove of tall elms that filtered the sunlight into thin, trembling threads. The building looked more like a converted farmhouse than a medical facility. Soft blue shutters, flower beds in bloom, and a porch swing that creaked when the wind passed through. Greg parked the car in silence. Caroline hadn't unclenched her hands since they left the house. Inside, everything smelled of lavender and antiseptic. A nurse led them down a quiet hallway lined with hand-drawn art and paper butterflies taped to the walls. "She's awake," the nurse said softly, as if the moment itself were fragile. "She's having a good day." They nodded, but neither of them spoke. Words felt too clumsy now, too loud for what they were about to step into. Lily sat in a chair by the window, legs folded beneath her, watching something invisible in the trees. Her hair had been cut, uneven but clean, and she wore a soft gray sweater that made her look even smaller than she was. There was a stack of paper on the table beside her, more drawings, fireworks, rooftops, red balloons. She didn't look up when they entered. Caroline stepped forward first. Greg stayed near the door, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. "Hi," Caroline said gently. "We're not here to rush anything, we just wanted to see you, to sit with you." Still, no response. Just the faint sound of birdsong outside and the scratch of pencil against paper. Caroline sat across from her, pulling something from her coat pocket, a music box, small and worn, the kind Lily used to keep on her bedside table. She opened it. The melody was soft, tinny from years of dust, but unmistakable. "Hush now, don't you cry. Stars are watching in the sky." A lullaby. One Caroline had sung countless times to a little girl who hated thunder, who needed music to sleep. The pencil stilled. The woman looked up. Caroline didn't move, didn't breathe. She just let the music play, her eyes locked on the girl, this stranger with her daughter's mouth, her daughter's eyes dimmed by time and fear. "Do you remember this?" Caroline whispered. "I used to sing it to you, every night. You'd ask me to start it over." The girl's lips parted. A flicker crossed her face, something shifting, surfacing. Her voice was cracked and dry. But she said it. "Mom?" Caroline broke. And in that single word, something long frozen inside the room began, slowly, painfully, to thaw.